Hello and welcome along to this week's Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt Addison. Tom Beattie is alongside me. Before we get stuck into this episode, don't forget to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan. You can go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Of course, our link will give you 4 extra months on top of the 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link for all of that is in the podcast description box below. For today's show, we're going to talk about Liverpool's 3-3 draw with Newcastle United. We might touch a little bit on Everton as well. And a topic that I've wanted to get into for a couple of weeks, really, is Darwin Nunez. But it feels like quite a few people are talking about him at the moment. So it feels like an opportune time to speak a little bit about him as well. But let's start with the 3-3 draw. As I mentioned, Tom, I've only just got back from Newcastle myself. It was an enthralling game for the neutral. It probably was 2 points dropped. I think that's probably fair to say. It's difficult to know how to assess that when they played so poorly in the first half. They then turn it around in the second. But what was your assessment of the game? Were you disappointed to see Liverpool draw, or was it another sort of point and still 7 points clear at the top?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to assess because I think kind of looking at it as a whole, kind of after the international break, obviously coming back, and it was a really tough run of fixtures, that wasn't it? And obviously Southampton, Man City and Real Madrid all within that kind of short space of time. But it just kind of seemed like maybe one game too many in terms of that sort of winning streak for me last night. And yeah, they just kind of looked a bit tired, I think, in some respects. And I think that, yeah, it's a tough game to assess because, you know, obviously Liverpool came from behind in the game on a couple of occasions. And I think to kind of go away to St. James's Park, obviously, I think second half, it was, you know, the atmosphere was up. I think they kind of played pretty well on the night. I think they're really dangerous going forward. A lot of good players in that team. I thought Bruno on the night was really good. Anthony Gordon out on the left wing was really strong. And obviously Isak leading the line as well. So, you know, you're always going to come up against these teams in the Premier League, sort of a quality across the park. And yeah, maybe a little bit lethargic last night, I felt, Liverpool, and ultimately you don't really get away with that in the Premier League. But yeah, it does feel like 2 points drop, like I said before, particularly to take the lead quite late on. I think Liverpool did really well to come back into the game and sort of hold the nerve, really. And I thought Mo Salah on the night was sublime, really. He's continuing that run of form that he's been in. So, yeah, a bit of an odd game to assess, but I think ultimately it does kind of feel like 2 points dropped because of sort of the position that Liverpool were able to get themselves into in the game.
They've obviously got a lot of injuries at the back at the moment. It's not really been talked about too much. I thought it possibly might be talked about a little bit more after they've conceded 3 goals and started to look a little bit shakier. Maybe not shaky completely, you know, when you factor in the mitigating circumstances. But were you surprised at all in terms of the way that they lined up in that defence? Obviously, Trent wasn't able to start, but came off the bench, onto the pitch and looked really, really good. But I have to say, I was surprised it wasn't Gomez a right back and Quansah in the middle. That probably would have made a lot more sense, really. But what did you make of those 2 performances on the night?
Yeah, like I say, I was a little bit surprised that obviously when the team sheet came out to see Quansah at right back. And I felt, to be honest with you, that Joe Gomez probably would have been better suited out there, if I'm completely honest. Obviously, he showed in the past he's pretty adept at full-back, and we know that we're not kind of going to get that sort of attack and prowess that you're going to get from Trent Alexander-Arnold, but we know that he's so solid defensively. So I was a little bit surprised that we saw Quansah sort of out at right back. I felt on the night that, you know, it was a difficult game for the two of them, really. I think coming in, and they've not kind of got that much experience, I think, playing together in terms of that sort of right-hand side of defence. And I think that, they were a threat all night, I felt. Sort of Anthony Gordon, he felt when he got on the ball, you know, he's very good at winning fouls and that sort of thing. And that's kind of all part of his game. He wins some set pieces, sort of higher up the field in that final third. And yeah, I think even when Trent came on, I think he won a free kick, didn't he? But I felt obviously when Trent came on, the game did change, and we saw that difference, didn't we, in terms of sort of level of performance. And, to be able to come on and get a couple of assists from the bench, I think serves kind of a reminder of his quality. But yeah, I felt on the night kind of Quansah and Gomez, not that they struggled so much, but, I felt that it was kind of an area of the pitch that I think Newcastle were able to target. And ultimately, they got the goal, didn't they, through Anthony Gordon down that side, and sort of a bit of a link-up between Bruno and then onto Isak and onto Gordon to score the goal. So, yeah, I just felt at points in the game that area of the pitch was maybe targeted by Eddie Howe, and they got a little bit of purchase, I think, in the game at times, kind of down that right-hand side. So, yeah, I think it looked a bit makeshift, didn't it, in some ways, particularly having Quansah out on that right-hand side. And, I think the manager's possibly looking to rotate, given that Trent's only just come back from injury and then had to play the City game as well. But I guess you can have that with the kind of run of fixtures that we've had, and obviously with the derby coming up as well, it comes even more thick and fast. So it'll be interesting to see what he does at the weekend, I think, now.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be Trent, but then it's a case of, is it Quansah, is it Gomez? Maybe Gomez is the first choice, and that's why he's been selected there, and Quansah's had to move out of position a little bit because he is behind him in the pecking order. But I just thought it would have made a little bit more sense, possibly the other way round. And I'm sure the only reason the Trent didn't start was because of that short turnaround, obviously Wednesday night to the Saturday lunchtime. I think Virgil van Dijk spoke about it afterwards of, it's almost like you come off one pitch and then straight back onto another one and playing again, because it's such a quick turnaround between these games. So it is tricky, but yeah, like you say, it just looked a little bit makeshift. It didn't look particularly good in that department, but it wasn't really the only position that maybe looked maybe not makeshift in midfield, because it certainly wasn't. But I thought Ryan Gravenberch really struggled as well with the intensity. I thought Tonali was excellent, and you mentioned Bruno there before. They've got some good players. Joe Linton, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I think he can get about the pitch and put his body in there and make it difficult. I thought Newcastle were really intense, and obviously you'd expect that under the light at St James's Park. But yeah, to me, it maybe looked like you mentioned one game too many for Liverpool, possibly one game too many for Ryan Gravenberch as well.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of performances in that midfield that was a little bit kind of like that. I felt Alexis McAllister, obviously he got that early yellow card, didn't he, I think, in the first kind of half an hour, and he looked a little bit hamstrung after that in terms of sort of his application, the sort of defensive work. So he's kind of running that tightrope a little bit. But yeah, it's the same for Ryan Gravenberch, like you say. And yeah, it seemed like one game too many. I think obviously the run of games that Liverpool have had recently, and they've been massive fixtures, haven't they? And you look at the Southampton game, for example, that was kind of won in sort of dramatic style, wasn't it? And then the City and Real Madrid games, they were kind of masterclasses really in terms of sort of the amount of kind of mental sort of focus that must have went into them games. So I think they just looked like a little bit of tiredness and a bit of lethargy. And like you touched upon there, Newcastle, I think at the best, they are an intense side. And I remember the year that they obviously qualified for the Champions League at Liverpool's expense. That was kind of what they were characterised by. It was kind of it was kind of reminiscent of Jurgen Klopp at his pomp, wasn't it, in terms of that intensity, particularly in the midfield and sort of the pressing and that sort of thing. And I think Liverpool kind of came a little bit unstuck at certain points in that game due to that. And Bruno, I thought on the night was really incisive with his passing and moving up forward through that midfield. And Tonali, I thought, looked really measured, didn't he? I think, we all know he's got a good passing range and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think he had a little bit of control in the game at times, and he done really well. So yeah, it was interesting that I looked before Liverpool won the possession battle in the game, which maybe you wouldn't expect against a side of that quality away from home. But I guess it's what you do with the ball, isn't it? And I felt at times they used the ball pretty well, to be fair to them. They were very direct moving forward, and they kind of got what they deserved, didn't they? Particularly the Gordon goal, like I mentioned before, and even the Isak goal. Obviously, it was a long ranger, but they were just kind of getting into them areas all the time, weren't they? And putting Liverpool under a lot of pressure. And yeah, it was kind of an odd game again to assess it in the midfield, but I think maybe Newcastle won the battle at points in that game. And yeah, it's one to kind of learn from, I think. And obviously going to Goodison Park, it's another kind of tough atmosphere to step into for the Liverpool players. So yeah, I think it's another one. It's a learning curve. The record this season being incredible, hasn't it, under Slot? But yeah, there's another big game to come at the weekend.
Yeah, I think that possibly is, maybe one eye on that as well. Obviously, Alexis McAllister had one eye on it to a certain extent because of his suspension, and that means that he's going to miss the derby at the weekend. So possibly Curtis Jones moved a little bit further back. Szoboszlai, I thought, was pretty good when he came off the bench. Obviously played a part in a couple of the goals as well. So it's not going to be a bad midfield, but I did think it was interesting that, it wasn't obviously Harvey Elliott that was turned to. Maybe he's not quite ready to come back into. Wataru Endo is there as well, but probably wasn't the right game for him with his limitations in terms of possession. If you press him, it always feels like you've got half a chance of winning the ball back. So I think it did just underline really that Liverpool, as good as Ryan Gravenberch has been, if there is somebody else who can play that role in a similar way, if that's in January or possibly next summer, it's 100% still something that I would be looking at. We discussed this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, about the priorities. I think that's still, for me, something that Liverpool have to look at, because possibly what we've seen in that Newcastle game, and who knows what's going to happen at the weekend, it might be completely different. But I think that was a reminder really that Ryan Gravenberch is brilliant, but he can't do it twice a week, every week for a full season, 60 games, when probably he's not done that for 2 or 3 years. He didn't play much for Bayern, he didn't play much for Liverpool last season. It was always going to be a big ask, I think, for him to do that consistently week in, week out. So I think that's probably a fair assessment, really. We've covered that midfield in terms of tiredness, but I would say there's probably no more worrying signs apart from that, really. It just felt fatigue-based rather than anything else. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I think obviously it was a little bit of a jaded performance in some respects, wasn't it? And like you say, with the likes of Gravenberch, there's kind of a lot of minutes in his legs now in terms of this season, and McAllister next to him as well. And, even turning to the players who come off the bench last night. So it was like you said, he played really well when he came on, but, he's somebody who Arne Slot's really relied on, hasn't he, so far this season in terms of his running and sort of the legs that he brings to that midfield. Obviously, Curtis Jones further forward as well. He really put himself about last night. There was a couple of moments where he really dropped deep as well, wasn't there? I thought second half, and he's always able to kind of take the ball on the half turn. But I think, like you hinted at before, if you're going to bring on a player like Endo, for example, there is that little bit more pressure with him, I think, in terms of sort of keeping all the possession and whether the opposition would kind of target back then. So, yeah, there's been a little bit of pressure, I think, in terms of sort of the regulars within the side of late. So, the likes of Gravenberch and McAllister, even Jones to an extent, Szoboszlai coming off the bench. So, yeah, I think the tiredness is always to be expected. And like I say, it's been such a rough run of fixtures, really, in terms of sort of the challenge that all of them games have posed for Liverpool. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. I think, the likes of McAllister, I was thinking before, I mean, it might actually do him good to sit the game out. Obviously, he's picked up that suspension, but yeah, possibly a game off might do him good. Obviously, coming off the back of a couple of international breaks as well, that's probably took it out of the tank, sort of in terms of his energy, really. And yeah, he's a player who always really applies himself in the game as well. He doesn't shy away from the ball. He does a bit of everything, doesn't he? So yeah, maybe kind of having a game off mightn't be so bad. I mean, you kind of got to look at it in those kind of terms, obviously, sometimes. But yeah, Ryan Gravenberch, I think you're right as well. That he's been relied on heavily, hasn't he, in that number 6 position, and possibly looking forward to January. If there was an option of sort of looking at sort of another, option in that midfield kind of area, I don't think that'd be the worst idea. But yeah, we're going to have to see kind of what the recruitment team look at doing, obviously. But yeah, it's possibly an area I think that the Liverpool should be looking to address. Liverpool are only 7 points, I think, ahead of Chelsea at the moment in second. So obviously Arsenal are level with them on goal difference. So yeah, it's kind of, you're looking over your shoulder a little bit. We know Liverpool are very much not home and dry in terms of the league. There's a very long way to go, and maybe that extra reinforcement in that area might make a massive difference, I think.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. I think it's just a case really of, whether that player is available. It's something they've looked at for a number of transfer windows and have come to the conclusion that they needed more of a short-term thing in Endo that maybe wasn't perfect, but they needed the body. Obviously, if that changes, and maybe Zubimendi possibly could change his mind, or whoever it might be, I think that would definitely be a sensible thing for Liverpool to do. Just before we move on and talk about Darwin Nunez, we've got to speak about Mohamed Salah as well. You mentioned him briefly before, but it was an excellent second half. I thought Lewis Hall dealt with him really well, actually, in the first half and kept him quiet, but we've seen that so many times this season. You can keep him quiet for 45 minutes, but doing it for the full 90, it was always going to be a difficult task. It looked at one stage like it was going to be a repeat of the Southampton game where Liverpool got 2-1 down and then Mohamed Salah changed it. Obviously didn't quite happen because of the Kelleher mistake at the end. But in terms of Salah, it's a line we're going to repeat a few more times, I think, before the contract is signed, if indeed it is signed. What more can he do at this point to convince you?
Yeah, I mean, from a fan's perspective, you're looking at him, and obviously Trent came on as well and changed the game in his own way as well, didn't he? And, you're just hoping as a supporter that them deals ultimately get done. But yeah, he can't really do any more than what he is at the moment. He's proven time and time again in the Liverpool shirt that he's a match winner. And I think this has been such a strong start to the season for him. He couldn't have done much more. And last night again, if luck had gone his way, I think he would have been the match winner again, wouldn't he? And the 2 goals I thought were sublime, particularly the second one, sort of on the half turn, and just that calmness under pressure. And he's put Liverpool in the lead there, away from home, and we've been up against it up until that point as well. It's been a tough game, and he just seems to be able to take games by the scruff of the neck at the moment. And there's not many players in the world who've got that ability. I mean, we had it kind of years ago with Steven Gerrard. Either sort of when the chips were down, he was always able to kind of raise his game and raise his performance. And it feels a little bit like that with Mo Salah, doesn't it? That he, when Liverpool are really kind of backs against the wall, he's the one you're looking at thinking, he's possibly going to be the one to get us the goal here. And it was like that last night again. And yeah, I don't think there's many kind of better players on performance, I think, so far this season in world football. I really believe that. Obviously, with the contract situation, he's 32 years of age, so there's always that debate over whether he'll have that longevity. But like we said before, you look at kind of recent examples in world football, the likes of Messi, Ronaldo, Lewandowski, Benzema as well. They went on into the late 30s, didn't he, producing? And he seems to be another one, doesn't he? He's kind of in the best shape of his life, I'd say, and he's producing some of the best form of his life as well. So, yeah, he can't really do much more in terms of the contract. And yet he just continues to be a massive kind of, big game player for Liverpool. And yeah, he's the one you always look at, isn't he? If Liverpool need a goal, he's the guy you're looking at thinking he's going to change the game. And I think when you've got a player like that, you're going to be there or thereabouts in terms of challenging for the league. And that's kind of been the story of the season, hasn't it? Players like him, Van Dijk, Trent, Gravenberch, they've all kind of stepped up this season. And I think they kind of got unlucky last night. I think it was one of them games, wasn't it, where, maybe a little slick up at the end. But yeah, maybe that's kind of the mental tiredness, I think, of coming through that run of games. And possibly, if they were a little bit fresher, would that mistake have happened? I was thinking that last night, It's been a really tough run of games for them. And yeah, I think they just came a little bit unstuck, I think, last night. And yeah, players like Salah, that they're proving their worth every single week at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's a genuine argument to say that he's the best player in the world at the moment on current form. He scored more goals now than Erling Haaland has in the Premier League, and he's got 7 more assists than Haaland as well. I think 21 in however many Premier League games it's been so far in terms of goal contributions, goals and assists combined. It's just remarkable, really. Obviously, get the 2 goals, but also sets up Curtis Jones's goal as well. So involved in all 3 for Liverpool in that second half. And as I said before, there's not really too much more we can say about him at this point. I think it's obvious that Liverpool really need to find a way of getting that contract done. Again, the caveat of you can't just give him whatever he wants, but to lose him would be absolutely ludicrous. But I think there was a bit of a conversation potentially about Darwin Nunez possibly, being someone who could move on next summer. Last night, it's not the first time that's cropped up. We'll talk a little bit about him to finish off the podcast, because it is something that I've been thinking about really for the last few weeks, just in terms of his performances. I didn't think he had the greatest of nights against Newcastle. Obviously, he was the hero off the bench last season at St James's Park, but there just wasn't the space really in behind for him to run into, and he just doesn't really seem to have the guile or the simple technique at certain times to make the right passes. The one where he gives the ball away really easily when he should have just been able to pass the ball to Szoboszlai, I think was just one that summed up his night really. It just didn't really go for him. I think I've thought for a while that, in the third season, obviously the first under Arne Slot, but the third season at Liverpool, we've got to see, big steps forward really from him. We haven't really seen that up to this point, but where are you up to with Darwin Nunez? Because there's always that bit in the back of my mind that thinks it could just click, it could just work out for him, but it just doesn't seem to be working for him at the moment.
Yeah, I think I share in that there's kind of, there's a bit of frustration really in terms of he is in his third season. We know kind of all the attributes on paper are there to be kind of a top level striker. But yeah, the goals haven't really come from so far this season. I think he's only got a couple in the Premier League, the Villa game and the Bournemouth game. And, starts haven't been that hard for him to come by after the Jota injury. So, he's been in the team. But yeah, I think in terms of his general play last night, I felt was pretty disappointing. Was link-up play. That's kind of been a big positive for me, I think, with him so far this season. There's been a couple of performances in there where I thought he was really impressive. The Chelsea game, the Arsenal game, for example, the Villa game as well, where obviously he got his goal. So there have been, decent performances in there. But yeah, I felt last night, obviously he missed a couple of big chances, didn't he? Particularly the one that kind of went across goal. I felt that was a massive chance in the game. These are kind of the fine margins, aren't they, at the top level? And, you go the other end of the pitch and, you can say what mistake kind of leads to 2 points dropped. And, you could possibly say that with a miss of that magnitude, couldn't you? The game kind of hinges on them big opportunities. You need your number 9 to be sticking them away ultimately. And I think at the opposite end of the pitch, I thought Isak, I thought he kind of put in the kind of performance you'd expect from number 9 really on the night. And there was that little bit of contrast for me. I thought his kind of hold-up play was excellent in the game. Obviously, he set up that goal for Anthony Gordon as well. So that interplay, I thought, looking at kind of the contrast between the two, I thought that was quite telling. I still think there's a player in there with Nunez. I'll still kind of keep the faith. We know, obviously, his quality, just in terms of, being able to, take the ball on, his hold-up play, I think, is really improved so far this season. But I felt like it was a real off night for him last night, to be honest. And yeah, there was a couple of missed opportunities. I think Liverpool were made to rue them, ultimately. I think it would have been a very different game. And yeah, you look at kind of the other options that Liverpool have. I mean, obviously Jota, we know he's been out injured. But I think when he's back, I think he'd be straight in the team for me. And then obviously Diaz as well. He played him through the middle one game, didn't he? I think the Leverkusen game, he ended up with a hat-trick. So that might be an experiment that he looks at again, I think, in terms of the manager. So, yeah, I think that kind of performance, you're hoping that bit more consistency kind of comes for Darwin, but he has had a big run in the team. And, yeah, you do kind of wonder whether that level of consistency is going to come for him in the Liverpool shirt. But, yeah, I felt last night probably wasn't his best performance, if I'm honest.
I think the Diaz point that you make there is really interesting. They obviously did that against Manchester City as well when they chose to go down that route. And Diaz was obviously a player that comes in and you think, well, he's only ever going to play on the wing, a typical Liverpool forward signing really. In previous seasons before that had been someone that could maybe play in 2 or 3 of those different roles. And everyone kind of looked at Diaz and thought, well, he's only going to play on the left. But the fact that he's now probably more of an option really heading into the weekend, I'd be happier, I think, to see Luis Diaz through the middle and Cody Gakpo off the left than I would be to see, Darwin Nunez at Goodison Park. Looking back to the game at Goodison last season, it wasn't a great one for Darwin Nunez either. So I just think that probably says everything you need to know really about the missed opportunity. You mentioned there that Diogo Jota's been out injured. It felt like that was an opportunity really for him to get games, and he has consistently played in that period, but hasn't really consistently performed and taken that next step. I think if it was going to happen for him this season, or certainly in the first portion of this season, he had to be patient at the start, had to wait for that opportunity, but it just doesn't quite feel like it's been taken really. And you mentioned the missed chances as well. I think it would be fine to maybe not have the hold-up play and the link-up if he was scoring the goals, or vice versa. You look at Firmino at certain points, didn't always find the back of the net, but he gave so much to the team in other ways that you could kind of, forgive that and move on from it. At the moment, it doesn't quite seem like he's doing either or. There's been glimmers of one or the other, but not really consistently. It's never quite been tied together all in one go. But in terms of the weekend, are you in agreement that Diaz possibly might be the best option, or would you give Darwin Nunez another go to see if he can put it right and maybe produce a couple of goals in the derby?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. Obviously, the old saying is kind of play people into form, but I think in this case, on the evidence of how well Diaz even did last night, I thought he was excellent down that left-hand side, obviously, and coming on for Cody Gakpo. And I felt that Cody Gakpo in the Man City game was excellent. Obviously, he got his goal. So you've got 2 players there that at the moment are really producing for Arne Slot, and I think to just kind of get them on the field together, I think that would be a good idea personally. Obviously, people might say it's a little bit makeshift, but, obviously the Leverkusen game, it did work, didn't it? That second half was probably one of the best kind of performances, wasn't it, of the season so far. Really impressive against the German champions. So, yeah, I think going away to Goodison, it's always a tough fixture for Liverpool. We saw that even under Jurgen Klopp, Liverpool's record there wasn't excellent. And like you mentioned before, I think Darwin, last time he played there, didn't kind of have one of his better games. So, yeah, I think it possibly could be a game where you slightly experiment and try and catch Everton unawares a little bit in terms of sort of the lineup. So, yeah, I'd be kind of thinking really of maybe springing a bit of a surprise, I think, at Goodison, if it was Arne Slot. And yeah, I think that possibly, Darwin, you could do with a bit of a rest maybe, or, even to come off the bench and maybe hopefully make an impact from there and, kind of see how he does now, obviously, from now till the end of the season. But yeah, I think obviously the Newcastle game, just kind of looking at his hold-up play and the missed chances, like you said, possibly it is time for a little bit of a change, I think, up top.
Yeah, I mentioned last season, Newcastle game, obviously he comes off the bench and scores 2 in that match. I wonder whether he is a player that is just better as a substitute, maybe to come on in the last 20, 25 minutes when there's a bit more space, there's a bit more, end-to-end and frantic play that seems to suit him a little bit better. There's maybe a bit less emphasis on the hold-up play, and it's not the first thing you think of really when you think of a substitute. It's more about what impact can they make in such a small space of time rather than the overall performance that someone might show over the course of 90 minutes. I think possibly that might be something that Liverpool have to think about, but obviously again that comes in the context of him being a record signing. You don't really spend that sort of money on a player whose best role is an appearance off the bench here and there to try and change a game. So it is, I think, a bit of a conundrum. I'm sure it'll be something that we speak about plenty more times before the end of the season as well. And I'm sure it's something that Arne Slot will be thinking about for the weekend as well. I'm sure we'll discuss the Everton game and probably Girona as well, which comes in the Champions League next Tuesday on next week's Liverpool.com podcast. But I think For this week, that will just about do us. We've spoken about plenty of things there. Do let us know your thoughts as well in the comments on Darwin Nunez and what Arne Slot and Liverpool should do with him in 2025. But for now, thank you, Tom, for joining me. Thank you to everyone at home for watching along and listening as well. We'll be back with the next Liverpool.com podcast next week.